All right, for today's video, I am just going over my process for end of season cleaning out the boat. So I use a Gorilla ladder to get on the boat. Some people use the swim ladder or they climb up from the bow, but I find the Gorilla ladder a lot easier and safer. I also use it as a mast stand when I'm raising or lowering the mast. So I just place it behind the stern for that. Also note that I have jack stands. I have two of them, one on each side underneath the frame rails of the trailer. And the Precision 18, if you stand too far to the stern without the jack stands, it will tip and damage the rudder if the rudder's down. So you definitely want to put the jack stands if you're not attached to a tow vehicle. So I start out by taking off the straps that I use to hold the mast onto the boat. So the mast is primarily held on at the stern and bow pulpits, and in the center that makes it flex and bounce. And so I put a throwable cushion on the companionway top hatch to keep it from bouncing and to hold it steady. So then I untie the stern end of the mast, and I use three straps. One basically to hold it to the pulpit, one that I'm untying right here that keeps it from sliding aft while I'm trailering, and that was a problem when I picked up the boat originally in Ohio. I had to stop several times and slide the mast forward because it was just moving further and further back. And then I have a third strap, which is actually a bungee that just puts a little downward pressure on it and is basically a backup strap. So I moved the mast off to the port side just because it makes it easier to get in and out of the companionway. And I probably should have put a strap around the pulpit rail because if I bump into the mast, it could slide off the boat and hit the ground. So I start pulling out my my large fenders and then my porta potty. So I'm just cleaning out all the stuff that's in the cockpit. And there is a method to the madness. So what I'm trying to do is place stuff around the decks where once I go back down the ladder, I can reach it either from the ground or from the ladder. I don't have to be in and out of the cockpit of the boat. So this is my, and see right there, I just hit the mast. It could have fallen. So this is my 80% jib, and if you saw my end of season, last sail of the season video, then you know I sailed in some pretty heavy winds, so I was flying the 80% jib. And of course, you know, it makes for a long day when you sail and then take down the mast. And then, of course, I still have a 2-hour drive home. And so I don't fold the sails at the marina or the boat ramp. And there's also no really clean place to do that. It's not like there's, you know, beautiful green grass. It's just kind of dirt and parking lot. So I always bring my sails home at the end of the season unfolded. So then I empty out the cooler, all the drinks that I had left over. And so this is kind of my first round of taking equipment out of the boat. So I climb down the ladder and then start shuttling everything to the garage. And everything I take off the boat, you know, is going to get either washed, rinsed off, or some kind of a wipe down, and then inspected. And then, you know, like lines and whatever are going to get hung up to dry. And then everything will get recoiled, all the lines will get recoiled, and then everything's either stowed in airtight totes or it goes back into the cabin for the winter for storage. So I grab my mainsail, and I'm very careful to prevent the sails or any of the lines from touching the ground. Any kind of braided line will pick up dirt very easily. And of course the sails also, you know, you just don't want to be rubbing them on the ground because it'll chafe them or they'll pick up dirt. So again, try to be very careful about keeping everything off the ground. So there goes my 80% jib. And I come back for my, so this is my deck bag with my 100% working jib. And then my fenders. And for cleaning the fenders, You can use hull cleaner on them, or I usually use magic eraser, which works really well. It gets all that staining off of them. This is the strap that I use to hold the bow to the trailer, and then all the straps that keep the mast tied to the bow pulpit. And I used to use rags underneath the mast, between the mast and the pulpit, just to give it a little cushion. This is my hatch cover. I use that to protect the hatch from hail because there's a lot of hail in my area. And then these are the rags that I use. I wrap these around the turnbuckles at the chain plate to keep them from scuffing the decks or the fiberglass. And then I just use a Velcro strap to keep them on. Alright, so now this is round 2, going back into the cockpit. So that's the throwable cushion that I use on the companionway top hatch to keep the mast from bouncing. Some of the straps. Here's my manual bilge pump that I keep in the fuel locker. My stern anchor, or also called a lunch hook, which is a 5.5 pound grapnel anchor with 4 feet of chain and 100 feet of line. And again, that stays in the fuel locker, and you'll see that that gets pretty dirty. So now I'm opening up the battery locker. So I've got my small fenders in there. I keep all 4 of them in there usually throughout the season. And you can see they've gotten quite a bit of staining. They're pretty dirty just from being in the water. And then, of course, my battery is also in there, and I do not store my battery inside the boat during the off season. I take it out because it's a LifePo 4 lithium iron phosphate battery. And the instructions recommend that you store it on a non-flammable surface. So I take it out of the boat and just let it sit in the floor of my garage. So then I go forward on the bow, and going forward on the bow along the decks with the mast down and without being able to hold on to the shrouds or the boom is a little precarious, kind of dangerous. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can move the ladder up to the bow and then just reach into the anchor locker. So I'm taking my Danforth anchor out of the anchor locker and then all the line. And so the Danforth, I just let it sit on the ground because it's not like it's going to get dirty. But the line I keep up on the deck so that it doesn't get dirty. So I start again, round 2, start shuttling stuff to the garage. So my bilge pump and my throwable and all my straps. So that's really dirty, and big spider nest, little egg pod, whatever you call those. Ugh, gross. And so this, again, is a small grapnel. It's a 5.5 pound grapnel, which it's really for kayaks, but it works well for a temporary anchor. And then chain, and in this case, 100 feet of line, so it's a little shorter. And as I'm pulling it out, a spider falls out of the bag, and it was a big spider. All right, so here's my Danforth. This is a 10E. It's a Sea Choice. So it's a size 10E, and that's designed for a 24-foot boat, which it's always good to get a size bigger than what your boat is. And so I just got the biggest anchor that would fit in the anchor locker. All right, so then I move my ladder and reattach my lifeline and just start rinsing off the boat and wetting everything. And I also give the trailer a good rinsing as well. So below the waterline, there was a lot of staining and a lot of marine growth. And so I use a power washer just to take off that, kind of the top layer of gunk by the end of the season that builds up. And you have to be very careful about the waterline stripe, not to hit that too hard because it will chip off or start peeling off. And then I did use hull cleaner below the waterline, but somehow I didn't capture that on video. But I use Booyah non-acid hull cleaner. I just spray it on that same brush and then rub it on all the areas below the waterline and let it sit for 5 minutes. And it does a great job. You'll see at the end just how clean the hull is. But so right now I'm just using regular like Turtle Wax car wash and scrubbing all the hull and the decks and the cockpit. And I do also use a sponge, so I do some areas by hand. So here's what it looked like when it came out of the water, and here's what it looks like at the end. So you can see that Booyah non-acid hull cleaner really does a great job of getting all that staining out of the hull below the waterline. And so now what I'll do is I'll put the boat in the garage for the winter, and then in the spring when I pull it back out, I'll go through the whole boat and polish any scuffs or anything out with new finish car polish, and then apply a coat of wax. You also want to make sure you clean under your rub rail, so you want to clean the fiberglass under there, and you also want to stick a sponge inside the rub rail and get all the dirt from inside the rub rail. All right, so I'm all done cleaning up the boat, and I think it turned out pretty good.